Well, good day, ladies and gents, and welcome back to another installment of Dan's Pro Shop. I'm your man, Dan. Today, we're just getting into it a little bit. I don't know, some routine maintenance, if you will, on one of the old dirt scooters. So, without further ado, let's just rack her up, shall we? That's right. This, guys, is an '07 KLX 110. If you guys know anything about the whole pit scene that got really big in like the early 2000s or whatever, everybody and their brother wanted and or had a 110 or multiple of them. This was just kind of like the fell right in the middle, and I got this at the right time, and dude, this thing has been cherry ever since. But it's, these things kind of just get run hard and put away wet. So we're going to actually kind of try to take care of it a little bit. So let's bring this thing up to dad level and get to it. Man, I apologize if yins are getting a lot of like fan noise in the background, but Lord Almighty, it is 93 degrees right now. It's toasty. It's one of those days where you're like, man, should I just be inside? Whatever. We got bikes to fix. So, the goal for today on this KLX here, number one, we're going to do an oil change because these things are kind of like lawnmowers. They kind of just get overlooked and, you just keep on adding it, But there actually is a filter in these things. But if you're like me and you have an aftermarket skid plate on these things, you have to take the skid plate off to get the oil filter housing off. Well, we're going to do that, not only, but also the dampener in the rear sprocket, where the sprocket actually goes into the hub on the rear wheel. Us guys, we're not supposed to ride these things, so they get beat up a lot. Like, I've put bigger springs and thicker oil in the forks to support the dad bod. Got an aftermarket rear shock, taller bars, higher seat, chooched up the engine just a scotch, but it's unreal how quick these things are. If you guys are into it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But either way, this rear wheel dampener thing. So the sprocket kind of indexes into these rubber dampeners, and then that's what transmits the drivetrain energy to the rear tire. And those things just like disintegrate over such amount of time. And not to mention, you're ripping on this thing, doing whatever you're doing. It's just getting beat up, especially because it's hauling 3 times the weight that it was designed to. So, yeah, let's just start doing the thing, shall we? Grab some tools. Let's see what we got here. Some metric. I need a reducer. This thing. Yeah. Alrighty, guys. Like I mentioned, we're going to be doing an oil change on this here girl. So, obviously, step one, ride it around. Beat it up. You get this thing good and toasty. Make sure all them oils and minerals and vitamins and everything are running around in there. So, whenever we drain the crankcase, we're actually getting what we want out of it. So, yeah, we're going to go ahead and remove this skid plate. Now, another little modification I did to this thing that I forgot to mention earlier is this thing right here, this black thing behind the skid plate. That's called a case cradle. Because if you guys are familiar with these things, from the factory, the foot peg assembly just bolts right into the aluminum engine case, which may be fine for a 6-year-old, but whenever you get us guys on these things, jumping these things, beating them up, doing whatever you're doing, whenever you come and land all of your dad weight down on these pegs, that is, it's a disaster. People were blowing bolts out of this case left and right, and then it strips them out, and worst case scenario, it breaks the case, and now you're leaking oil everywhere. So these case cradle things transfer the weight of you on your pegs back to the swing arm. So in order to take this skid plate off, the bolts go up underneath that case cradle. So those bolts need to come out too. But either way, that's just another step. So these bolts right here This is the factory mount location for the foot pegs, like I was mentioning. This really isn't that big of a deal. And to do just an oil drain and fill, you do not need to do this because you can get to the drain plug through the bottom of this thing. But in order to get the oil filter off, like I mentioned before, this is it right here. So you can't get that cover off unless you take the skid plate off. So hence what we're doing right here. Once we have that hardware removed, just wiggle and yank. Now your skid plate's off. Now we have access to this. So I'm not sure if these things, a lot of them came factory with these aluminum skid plates, but you know, if you're doing dad crap like this, I strongly suggest. So next step, before we go ahead and lose any engine temperature, grab the nastiest drain pan you can sitting out at the end of the driveway. Yeah, either way, it doesn't matter. It don't have to be clean. It's just got to keep you from making a mess in here, right? So we're going to go ahead and yank the crankcase drain. And while that's happening, we can mess around with the oil filter housing. So just in case yins are curious, this is it right here, and it's 17 mil. Go ahead and yank this thing off. Let the engine start draining. Oh boy. Look, that's actually not terrible. You can, there is some goop in there, but it's honestly not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Might as well pull the fill cap over here on the clutch cover. Make sure everything's good and out of there. Now, I know a lot of yins may be saying to yourself right now how insanely overkill this is. This got a 1,500-pound pneumatic bike lift, and this is what I'm doing with it. But I tell you what, man, when you have this kind of crap, use it. It's fantastic. I love that I can do this up here now. I'm not rolling around on the floor, so it makes these stupid little pain-in-the-butt tasks that much easier. Now we got all that going on, we can go ahead in here and pull the oil filter housing. There you go. 8 mil. How you like that? Go ahead and hook up our ratchet. Uno. And dos. Cool. Honestly, not all that bad. Now, whenever yins pull this thing out, pay mind, there is a spring in the cap along with the O-ring that's right now stuck to the case. But do not lose this spring. It is important. That's what holds the oil filter element into the port on the case. So whenever you do this, make sure you don't lose that spring. If you do this and you don't have a spring, make sure you procure one. It is important. We'll go ahead and yank this guy out of there. And that's all it is. A cute little, I think this is a K&N element filter, but yeah, that's all there is to it. Just plop that down in there because it's no good no mo. Check our O-ring seal, and it looks fine. It was just stuck on the wrong side. We'll clean all this crap up before we go back in. But now, let's head on over to the parts counter and find us a new filter. Let's see what we got here. Oh, that's chainsaw stuff. How you like that? Right next to the Harley filters and the ATC. Well, we are clearly not in a rush here on this more than steamy Saturday. So, just going to let this drip dry, you know. Grab us some brake cleaner, carb cleaner, whatever kind of cleaner you want. Clean out all this junk before we put it back together. So, let's grab some of that. All right. Got me some AC Delco carbon choke cleaner. Because a buddy of mine works at a GM dealership right up the road, and they get this stuff by the case, and they cannot use it fast enough. So luckily, I get some donated afters. But you, whatever you want, guy. Make sure you take the O-ring out whenever you do this, because O-rings don't really react well to acidic stuff of this nature, like brake cleaner, choke cleaner, whatever. It's just make sure you take the O-ring out before you do this. Well, that's not bad. Now we'll go ahead and clean that up with a rag here in a moment. But we'll go ahead and do the exact same thing up in the engine case. Now, this step isn't as important, but either way, it's still good to make sure everything's good and clean, and this mating surface is good, clean, and like free of pits and corrosion and crap, because that's where that O-ring seals. So this is important. Go ahead, clean this up just a little bit. Oh yeah. I'll tell you what, man, this thing is still in killer shape for being an 07. These things are so much fun. So like I mentioned, we are in no rush here today. It is pert near beer 30, if I had to tell you. So, just going to go ahead and take our time, make sure everything's as good as it can be, because honestly, I have no idea when's the next time I'm going to do this. I couldn't even tell you the last time I did it. I know, shame on me, as I'm Mr. Maintenance and making sure everything's good to go, but you know, the toys like this kind of get neglected. Now, the big bikes, I make sure that they're taken care of all the time because they are insanely expensive to fix, and you know, just it's best to keep up on the routine maintenance on those things. But this one, you know, is more of a toy. You just kind of have fun with it, and it's easily forgotten about. So I know, shame on me. But make sure all this stuff is good and clean before we install the new filter. So like I mentioned here, this is the oil filter cover, and this is the spring that you absolutely need to make sure is in here. It indexes into those bottom little tabs there, and it stays there. We make sure that we get our O-ring, goes in the cleaned out groove, make sure there's a little bit of oil on this O-ring so it seals well, and now we can install the filter. So now that we got this thing all cleaned up, mating surfaces are good and ready to go, go ahead and grab our brandy new filter. And if you guys are interested, I will throw a link for all this crap down in the description so it's easier for you to find if and when you choose to do it. So we'll just take a little dab of oil there out of the drain pan, put it on the rubber bushing inside of the filter. It clips onto the nipple inside of the port, and it will stay there until we go and put the cover back on. So that's what we're going to do right now. Now, you guys looking at this thing, you see that there's 2 screws on here, and it's round. So it's not necessarily directional. This can go on either way. There isn't a wrong way to do it. We'll go ahead and put the cover back on here. That spring is now pushing against the filter, as it should. That's why that thing's so important, because it keeps the filter pressed against the engine the way that it should. Go ahead and start these. Try our best not to drop the screws down into the oil pan. Get everything started, and then we'll hit it with the ratchet. Now, please make sure that you start these by hand and get them in a little bit. Do not just go right to a power tool, because if you strip this, it's aluminum threads in your engine case. I don't need to tell you how bad that is. So, go ahead and just snug them up, and then we will actually tighten them with a hand ratchet. Do not use power tools for this stuff. I mean, I know I just did, but either way, take caution. Now, you may be asking yourself, hey, Dan, is there a torque spec for those bolts? Oh, yeah, there absolutely 100% sure is. Do I know it? No. No, never have, probably never will. But if you've been doing this for long enough, you know, you kind of got that calibrated elbow. You know when is enough. You know, whenever righty-tighty all of a sudden becomes righty-loosey. It's just, especially with bolts into aluminum threads. You know, you kind of get the feel for it. You know when enough is enough, and you just chill. So, I mean, if you'd like, look up the torque spec, but just use your noggin here and don't go nuts with it. So now that's all put back together. We can clean up the drain plug, make sure you got an appropriate crush washer on that thing, you know, the sealing aluminum washer. We'll go ahead and put that back up in and start filling things. All right, we got our drain plug cleaned up here. Go ahead and clean up where it goes just a smidge. I would like to put a new sealing washer on here, but I just looked at the stock and I don't have one that size. But, I mean, this one's okay. You can tell it's a little clapped out, but we'll get by just fine. So this guy is, what size is that? 17? 7? Yeah, that makes sense. And this is the same thing. You know, it's you want it to be tight, but you know, it's easy to go too much with this. So I call that good. Right whenever you start thinking about it, yeah, that should be fine. Now everything's all put back together. We can reinstall that skid plate and put oil in it. Doesn't hurt to stop every once in a while and clean up your workspace. You know, a happy bike lift is a clean bike lift. So I'll go ahead and try to give you a little bit better view on this go around here, so you don't got to be looking at my noggin most of the time. But this guy here, these tabs go on top of the case cradle that I was talking about and underneath the factory foot peg location. So go ahead and wiggle this thing back in there where it's supposed to be and reinstall our hardware. Now these bolts here, they go through the case cradle, up through the skid plate, and into the original crankcase hole location. Please, for the love of everything holy, make sure that these are the proper length. Because if you have this thing even a quarter of an inch too long, it's a blind hole that goes into your engine case. So if that bolt is too long, you will continue to drive that thing up in there. It will split the case and you will now have an oil leak. Ain't nobody got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So make sure that this stuff is correct. So now once we got these all in and tightened up sufficiently, this is the same thing as the other ones I've been preaching this whole time. These are steel bolts that are going into blind aluminum holes in your engine case. So please, please, please take caution with this. And now we get back up here to the front of the skid plate, and there are two different screws for this also. The short one goes on the right side by the pipe. The long one goes on the left side by the shifter. You can mess this up. I mean, it's difficult because if you put the short one in the long hole, it's not long enough. But trust me, these need to go in the right position. Hi. Hey, thanks. We'll go ahead and hand tighten all these skid plate bolts. Because stupid aluminum threads, man. I know it sounds like a broken record, but you rip the threads out of an engine case one time, you don't forget it. I tell you what, I know what we're missing here. There you go. Now we're cooking with grease. Nothing better than an ice cold iron. Oh, you have to excuse me, man, but it is a scorcher out here today. Now that we got all that crap put back together, I suppose we should put oil back in it before I promptly forget to. Let's get on over to the other side and do that. Now, as far as putting oil in this thing, I've done this about 6 gazillion times in the time I've owned this thing, so I just know that this thing takes right about a quart to be full. Now, keep in mind, since the oil filter case is now empty, it may take a skosh more. Let's just say 1.1, 1.2, or whatever. But I know you dump a quart in there, you're right about the top. Now, another thing you may be asking yourself, hey, Dan, what kind of oil does this thing take? Well, I know it's supposed to take like 1040 or some kind of crazy, awesome, whatever, dirt bike oil. But what do we got here? Good old Pennsylvania Premium. Wolf said semi-synthetic 530. You know why? Because that's what I have a case of. So any oil is better than no oil. Now, another cool thing that you guys may not be used to, because most motorcycles, well, particularly dirt bikes, don't have this. You see this guy right here? We have a sight glass on the side of the crankcase because the oil fill plug does not have a dipstick. So either you need to know whatever your capacity is and be short of it, or you check out that sight glass right there. Can you see it moving in there? Ever so slightly. You see, we want the oil to be between the top hash and the bottom hash. So whenever this thing's perfectly vertical, that's where you want it to be. So right now we're about spot on. We'll go ahead and start it and check it again. Go ahead. Make sure we're in neutral, because last thing you need is this thing taking off on you for no bloody reason. Put the oil fill cap on, because this is where the clutch is. And if you start it with this thing off, it will just come screaming all out at you. So go ahead and make sure that we're turned on. Make sure the fuel's on, because I have a good habit of shutting that off. There you go. Got the fuel on, got the switch on, got it neutral. Let's send it. Come on. Come on. Oh, man, this thing's still got a lot of compression for how old it is. Here I am thinking I beat the dog snot out of it. This thing's still doing good. Come on. Here, you thought I was going to break my arm, didn't you? Man, I love mini bikes. So now that everything's ran and everything, we'll go ahead and check the oil again. But I'm betting Yin's caught something here. You see here on the front end, we actually have an LED headlight and this weird looking thing. Well, if you guys are familiar with these, this is a 110. They make a 110L also that's a little bit bigger. It's 4-speed, it has a clutch and electric start. This one does not. So like there is not an electrical system on this bike because it doesn't have an electric start. So there's no battery or anything. Yes, you have the magneto and everything that runs the ignition, but it's not really an electrical system. So I do a lot of extracurricular things on this, you know, having fun dad time. So usually that carries on until after dark. And whenever something like that happens, this is where that comes into play. Check this out. Go ahead and grab your favorite Dewalt battery right here, huh? Check that out. How awesome is that? And I have a switch up here on the handlebars opposite of the kill switch. So yeah, it's cool. And not only does this give you unlimited, 12 volt DC LED light that's easily changeable. The battery goes dead, get a new one. But honestly, this thing lasts hours. You'll probably run out of gas before this thing goes dead. But the cool thing up here in the handlebars where the switch lever thing is, whatever you want to call it, there is a USB outlet. So, I don't know. Let's just add, for whatever you need, a USB outlet for. You can charge your phone. It's just cool that now we have all this accessory power on a machine that wasn't originally supposed to have it. So if you guys are interested in this little get up, I will add all of this crap in the description also. You can put this on quite literally anything. Put this on your bicycle, your lawnmower, whatever. It was a cool application to put a headlight on a dirt bike that wasn't supposed to. And honestly, other than this, janky get up, it kind of looks factory. There just really wasn't a better place for the battery, so that's where it ended up. But either way, I think it's freaking awesome. Now we're back over here after being sufficiently sidebarred. I get sidetracked, whatever. Cool stuff, right? So, like I mentioned, we're looking in this sight glass here. Make sure the machine is vertical. And I'll tell you what, man, we're right there. I mean, it's not perfect. I don't know. We're pretty well straight up and down here. And it's right about in the middle of the sight glass. So honestly, I'm happy with that. So for future reference, if you guys are wondering, exactly 1 US quart. Dump it in there with a full oil change with a filter, and Bob's your uncle. You're set, man. Now that everything's full of oil and circulated and we know that the level is good, this is also the moment of truth to see if you messed up anything down here. Not only maybe you left the drain plug out, or maybe you didn't tighten the oil filter housing or left an O-ring or something out, but in the event you got a little crazy with some of those bolts underneath, maybe you put the wrong one in the wrong place, or you cross-threaded something. Yeah, man, if you screwed something up under here, you're going to know pretty darn quick, because all that oil you just put in the crankcase is now going to be down here. So it's always reassuring whenever you do this and then you run it a little bit that none of that oil is on the ground. It's supposed to be in here. But yeah, we've avoided that conflict. So now that part of it's done, just the regular old maintenance oil change, like I mentioned earlier, we are going to put a dampener in the rear hub, which really isn't all that involved. We just got to put a scissor lift center stand thing under here, get the rear tire off the ground, And then we can rip the rear tire off, take the sprocket out of the hub, and it's really not that bad, I promise you. Oh, hey, I couldn't help but notice you checking out the swag here, the Dan's Pro Shop high-vis t-shirt, because why not be seen? You know what I'm saying? Either way, I come from a background, you know, I used to be on construction sites all the time working on heavy equipment, so this was like a normal thing for me, wearing high-vis. And I just thought it was cool to bring the Pro Shop to people in that industry. It's, hey man, this is just one of many offerings. We got hats, we got t-shirts, stickers, koozies, all kinds of whatever. So if you're interested in picking up some of this swag for yourself, check out dansproshopltd.com and see what's out there for you. Maybe, you know, something that tickles your fancy. So if you want to be seen and safe, check out dansproshopltd.com. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my jankiest scissor jack here out of, what was this? A 1991 Honda Accord. Yeah, I ended up scrapping the car because it just like fell apart and it wasn't worth trying to get a sticker on here in Pennsylvania. So yeah, I scrapped the car, but kept the scissor jack. Why not? So I have an actual scissor jack for this thing, you know, like for picking up 1,000-pound Harleys, but it's buried somewhere. It doesn't get used all that often. This thing was just sitting in the middle of the floor. So we'll go ahead and do this the most safe and correct way possible. There we go. Find some good place to put this thing down here. How you like that, fella? Now we're up off the ground. Now we can tear the rear wheel off of this thing and get to doing what we need to be doing. Now I know, this doesn't exactly scream safe or proper, but come on, you can quite literally throw this thing on your shoulder and carry it. I mean, not saying you'd want to, but you can. But either way, you get the point here. You got to do what you got to do. So in order to do this step, the first thing you're going to want to do is take the axle out. So we're going to go ahead and release the chain tension bolts here. You know, those, I don't know, what do you want to call them? They're like eye bolts, okay, if you're not familiar with dirt bikes. They go around the rear axle and help you align the rear tire so the sprocket is straight with the drive sprocket. This is super important. Hey, we're going to reset it up whenever it goes back in. So if you'd like to now, either mark these things with a Sharpie or take a measurement or something so you're sure that everything goes back in the way it was. I'm going to try my best not to loosen them and see if we got enough wiggle in the waggle to release the chain without undoing that so I don't got to mess with it, because right now it's already set up correctly. Now, that brings up another thing, that you have slap in your chain. This is a thing. Now, with bigger bikes, I don't know, the geometry of your suspension changes all of this. So imagine, if you will, we have the swing arm here on a single pivot. So whenever this thing is relaxed all the way down like it is now, the axle is closer to the drive sprocket, right? Whenever we go up, because we're on a fulcrum here running on a radius, whenever the swing arm is perfectly parallel to the ground or at its longest position from the drive sprocket, it changes the tension on the chain. So whenever that thing sweeps in a motion like this, I know this is exaggerated, but trust me, it makes a difference. So we start down here, the chain is loose. Whenever we come up here, this is kind of where you want it to be. So this is like setting the sag on your rear suspension, if you guys know what that's talking about. But whenever you come up to the top, the chain gets loose again. And since we are big guys on little machines that weren't necessarily made to do this, whenever you set up your chain slap, you want to be sitting on it. So I know it's weird because you want it to be set correctly to where the suspension is going to ride normally. If you do it now and set up the proper amount of slap in your chain now, it's going to be way too tight whenever you're at that longest point. So I know I'm rambling here, but this is something it's a pit bike thing, because if you set it up correctly now, it's going to be wrong later. So that's why I mentioned either take a note or taking a measurement to that. But I'm done talking. Let's just start ripping bolts out. So in case you guys are unfamiliar, a lot of these smaller motorcycles have a castle nut on the rear axle. So this is retained with a cotter pin right here that we're going to have to remove so we can take out the rear axle. A lot of the bigger bikes don't have this just because the engineering is a lot better and they don't really come loose. But we need to take this out and then use super high-tech equipment to take this thing off. Oh boy. All right. I got that loose. There we go. We're going to get one side. We're going to get it. Nice. All right, so that adjusting bolt over here, we got it to come off. Now, let's see if we can't get the same thing on the other side. Grab us a rubber hammer and give this axle some persuasion. There we go. Now, keep a hand on this thing. She's going to drop whenever you pull this out, so just make sure you're ready for it. Oh, yeah, and there's an axle spacer for you, so make sure you pay attention to that. All right, we got both of these out. Now, with this thing, a bigger bike would have disc brake in the rear. This has a drum. So this stuff kind of has to come apart to remove the rear wheel, but we will get through that. Well, I'll tell you what, we may not actually need to take this thing apart for what I'm doing here, because the swing arm really doesn't give enough clearance to yank out the brake assembly in one piece, and there is linkage here because it's a drum, so it has to be fixed to the bike somehow. But either way, we can swing this thing down out of the way enough to pull the sprocket hub out of the other side and do what we need to do without disassembling the rear brakes and resetting everything for no reason. Push this thing down so we have enough just to get the sprocket out. We'll go on the other side. We may actually need to go up a little bit more here on the lift, because why not? Sweet. All right. Now you guys see here how the whole thing just comes down, and this is what we're doing. Look at that. This is what we're replacing right here. And actually, now that I'm playing with these things, these really aren't all that bad. But we went through all the trouble to do this. I got new ones. They're going in, by golly. Alrighty, what we got here is some genuine Kawasaki rear hub dampeners. I got these off of RockyMountainATV.com, and for those of you that are curious, the part number is 92161-0084. Now, keep in mind, these things are separate, so whenever you buy these, you're going to need 4. You can't just buy, like, a kit of them. I want to say that these were, like, $5 or $6 a piece or something, but they are separate. So if you order these things, make sure it's this part number times 4. So we'll go ahead and undo these guys, and this is as simple as you want it to be. You just yank off the old one, and if they're in decent shape like this, I suppose keep them. But take that off, put the new one in right in its place, and that's it. You can tell that these things are a lot more rigid than the other ones. So if nothing else, they're not really disintegrated, but they have a higher durometer, meaning that they're stiffer kind of rubber. So we'll just go ahead and do this for all 4 and reinstall. Cool. You can't hope for much better than that. I mean, this is a super simple procedure. Now would be a good time if you want to get in there and clean all that stuff up too, because, I mean, you don't get in here quite often. So, I don't know, same thing, some brake cleaner, carbon choke, whatever you want. Get in there, clean that up. Yeah, there we go. We're not taking it to a car show. It don't got to be perfect. Just got to work. And this is a perfect time to redo bearings and or drive sprocket should you need to. This one is a 33 tooth, and I think it's a 15 in the front and 33 in the rear. So that is different from factory. It takes down a little bit of speed, but gives you significantly more torque. So like you're trying to drag your 200-pound butt up a hill in second gear. You know, this is kind of like a Goldilocks ratio I've found. And again, you can get all this crap off of Rocky Mountain. I will link everything that I can think to link whenever we get to that point. Now, we've got all this crap. Put it back in. Oh, man, that is significantly more snug than the old one was. So in case you guys are wondering, and I didn't explain it very well, this rear wheel dampener, the whole point of that is it takes like the snap out of this thing whenever it's driving. So the chain drives the sprocket in its own hub, and then it transfers through these dampeners to the hub of the wheel. So it doesn't really beat up the hub and the wheel as much, and it's much easier on the drivetrain and the engine. So since this thing is automatic 3-speed, it doesn't have a clutch, whenever you yank on this thing, it's not as hard on the clutch to engage the rear wheel because it has some forgiveness. And also, you are a lot less likely to rip the spokes out of the rear tire because you're a big guy on a bike that's not made for it. So make sure that these things are in good condition. Reinstall everything. We're going to go ahead and clean up this axle bolt. Put some anti-seize on it. Believe me, put anti-seize on it. You will thank yourself for it later. Clean this up, anti-seize, reinstall. Another thing we can't forget about is these wheel spacers. Like you've seen that one fall out on the other side. Well, the big one goes on the right-hand side. The small one goes on the left. There are indexing notches on this. So I don't know if you guys can particularly see that. There is a notch on the one side. That goes into the seal. Just so you know, that's how it goes. There is an orientation. I'm not sure if it's that big of a deal, but either way, it's good to put it back the way it was. So we're back over here at the old parts counter here. Make sure you clean up this axle bolt very well because like this is quite literally the only thing keeping the rear end of your bike together. So clean it up real good. Grab us that gnarly old jug of anti-seize that everybody has had since forever and apply liberally. You know, I mean, this is going to make a mess no matter what. But the last thing you want is this thing rusting and rotting inside the rear hub. Not only will that damage wheel bearings for no reason, you know, it's no sense in beating up stuff for no reason, but if you do regular maintenance on this, like I probably should a little bit better, it makes it so this thing just comes out. You don't have to fight with it next time. I don't know if you guys have ever done this before and you've had to drive out axle bolts with like a punch and a brass hammer. Just do yourself a favor. Clean this stuff up and it'll be perfect for next time. So now that everything's about ready to go back in, cannot forget to put the chain back on the sprocket because that's royally going to suck. You put this thing all back together and now you got to take it back apart and put the chain on. So go ahead, put this thing back up to where it's supposed to go. Oh boy. And then start threading the axle bolt through. Do not forget to put your chain tensioner back on here first in the correct orientation. So we'll go ahead and start threading the bolt. We'll get it through most of the way and then go back on the other side because we got to put the spacer over there too. Don't forget about that. Come on. Come on. Oh, we gonna get you. We gonna get you. There it is. Bravo. Now we can pull everything back to where it was set up because I know I had that chain tension right. So once we get the wheel and the hub pulled back, go ahead and put that right back where it's supposed to go. Send her home. We'll do the same thing on the other side. We got our adjusting bolt. Put that back over and we will start our castle nut onto the axle bolt. Now, send it back up to where it was supposed to be originally. Make sure that these are tight because that is what determines the slop in your chain and the straightness of the rear tire. So like if you look down the chain to the drive sprocket up at the engine, that chain should be perfectly straight. If it's not, you can use these to adjust the angle of the rear tire to make sure that that's right. Once we're sure all that stuff is right, and we know it is because we didn't change anything, go ahead and crank this axle nut back down. Now, you guys and your torque specs, I know. Dan, what's the torque spec? What is the torque spec, you ask? I don't know. It's a 10-inch crescent wrench until I feel happy about it. So we're going to go ahead and crank this thing. I don't know. If I had to guess, I don't know. Tight enough is what it is. But you want to make sure that your castle nut is lined up with one of the through holes in the axle bolt so then we can put a new cotter pin in it. Let's just go ahead and dig in for one of those. So here we are back over at the ye old parts counter. I'm going to put that away before I forget about it and get covered in it. Cotter pins. What are we looking for? 1/8 inch by 1 inch. That should, I tell you what, let me take a 332 also just in case, but I'm pretty sure it's 8. Ah, it is 332. Well, I guess it's a good thing I brought one with us, huh? Go ahead, tap that in until you're satisfied. Oh, oh, come on. There we go. And then we'll bend over the bottom. Come on. Make sure you use your best 10-inch crescent hammer. There you go. Now you can do all the ripping you want, and you know you won't lose your axle bolt. Now that we're all put back together, let's just check for function, shall we? Wheel bearings are arguably perfect. I mean, I think I just did this last year, but either way, it's all good. The chain is in okay condition, not enough to make me spend the money to buy a new one, but everything is lined up. It looks super good. Everything's happy. Rear brakes work fine. They're adjusted good. And the tire is a little whooped, but still holds wind. We're good. But I'm willing to bet this makes a huge difference with those new dampeners. Go ahead and set this thing back down on the ground. And for those of you not from Western Pennsylvania, you may not know what I just said. We talk funny in Pittsburgh, and whenever you say down, D-O-W-N, we say it down, like D-A-H-N. It's just, I know it's dumb, but whenever I get rambling, you know, my native comes out, and that's just the way it is. But yeah, we're back on the grind. Well, it would appear as though that about finishes at least what we had planned for today. Now, another thing is maybe asking yourself, hey, Dan, you are a grown man that is way too big for that thing, and what's the deal? Well, dude, if I got to tell you about riding pit bikes, it's a blast. This is one of the most fun things you can do on two wheels. It's because, like, you're not supposed to do it. It's that much more fun. Like, you're doing 40, 50 mile an hour, and you're this far off the ground. Don't get me wrong, these things are dangerous. I venture to say probably the worst I've ever gotten hurt on a dirt bike was one of these things because you get overconfident and they're little. It's a bunch of fun. Don't get me wrong. But either way, be careful. Make sure you wear all the gear as though you were on a big bike. But the whole point here, why I'm getting this thing redded up, ready to go, and in better shape, shall I say, is because I am getting all my crap together, ready to go to AMA Vintage Days in Lexington, Ohio. In case you guys don't know what I'm talking about AMA Vintage Days, dude, you are missing out. This place is, if you love anything to do with motorcycles, I know it says vintage in the name, and well, it is catered to older machines, but dude, it is bikes of everything. And if you've ever been to a bike event, this one's better. I promise you. It is enormous. They have, I think it's actually like a record. It is like the biggest motorcycle swap meet in the States. It is enormous. Hence, one of these things. If you're on foot, you cannot see the entire event in 3 days. I mean, if you did, you'd be running through the whole thing and you'd end up passing out by noon. It is just unreal. This place is enormous. Like, you can camp there for the entire weekend, which I'm doing. I'm going to get there Thursday morning and then not leaving until Monday morning. It is the most fun that you can absolutely have at a bike event. Like, they do road track racing, obviously, because it is like a supercar track. It's Mid Ohio sports car track. I don't know. But this is where the event is held at Mid Ohio Racetrack. So obviously they have road racing all weekend. They have hair scrambles for different classes, you know, like from this year to this year and this size engine and yada, yada, yada. So there's hair scrambles running all weekend. There's regular MX with all of its classes also. They also have pit bike racing. They have little kid like Stasic racing. They have just I believe they started doing trials last year or the year before, so that's going on too. On top of the swap meet that's open the entire time, they have vendors. They have food, there's camping, there's all kinds of attractions and stuff going on too. Like they got the Wall of Death, and all the big OEM manufacturers are usually there. Like last year it was sponsored by Royal Enfield. I believe it is also this year. But usually like Harley Davidson has a tent there, BMW, Triumph, all the big stuff like Honda, Kawasaki, Yamaha, all the big names in the industry bring all their new stuff to this place because it is like, it's kind of like the SEMA for motorcycles, even though it is like older stuff, but this is just an awesome stage to present the motorcycle community to the world. And it's such a good time. But I know I'm rambling. This thing is absolutely awesome. Matter of fact, I actually filmed the majority of this event last year. I will post that right here and down in the description so you guys can see it. I know it's a long video, but dude, it's a big place. So I was touring around on this thing and I was filming the majority of it. So if you guys are going to want to get a little taste of what it is, dude, check out the video. I'm telling you, it's fantastic. Words don't do it justice. You got to see it to believe it. And going to it is even better. And I'm telling you, man, whenever the sun goes down and they close the gates to the general public, it gets even better. That was why I put a headlight on the mini bike, you know, so you're not limited by the sun being out. It is just so much fun, and it's unreal. But like I mentioned, check out the video down in the description, and like I'll put links and stuff so you can get like tickets and stuff if you're interested. But that's coming up. I think it's the third weekend in July, so like it's coming up rapidly. Like it's close. We're already packing the camper, getting ready to go. So now that we're done being off topic, I just want to let you know, like that was kind of the push behind getting this thing ready, because we're going to put some hours on this thing whenever we go to AMA. Last time I went there, I think I went through like 5 or 6 full tanks in this. And those of you that know these things, that is a lot of riding for one of these. So it is a hoot. It is a real good time. But now all this crap's done. I guess the only thing that's left is to see how she runs. Man, this thing is so nice. I'll tell you what, I'll link this table in the description too, just in case, yeah, I don't need to tell you. Contact. Man, I don't need to tell you guys how much fun these things are. Well, guys, that about wraps this one up. I think that was a screaming success. That thing did really good. And it's not a huge noticeable difference, but it is a noticeable difference. You know, the rear tire reacts a little quicker to your throttle. But either way, just maintenance the machine, make sure everything's good and handy. You know, changing oil, as dumb as that may be, keeps stuff going for a long time. And replacing wear items whenever you start noticing they're going bad makes a huge difference. So I'd call it a huge success, and hopefully we can go a while without doing that again. I hope you guys enjoyed this a little bit. You know, maybe give you a kick in the butt to go out there and do some maintenance on your own. You know, you got this stuff. If it's nice, do your best to keep it nice. And like I mentioned, I will do my best to link all this stuff down in the description. So in the off chance that you have this same machine, you can do the same project and maybe even like add a headlight to it. And like I said, that headlight doesn't have to be for this thing. It's quite literally for whatever you want. I mean, that kit wasn't specifically made for that bike. I mean, I made it fit it. I made sure that I got the bar clamps the right size, and then a little bit of ingenuity, and bada bang, you got a headlight. And also, like I mentioned, guys, AMA Vintage Days in Lexington, Ohio, at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Track. That's what it's called. Dude, it is such a good time. And like I said, I'm going to be there all weekend. And I'll probably be wearing one of these neon awesome Dan's Pro Shop shirts. So like you won't be able to miss me. If you guys do run across me, it's like, give me a shout out. Like, hey Dan, I'm a sub. And I'm going to have a backpack full of like koozies and stickers and stuff. So if you run across me and say, hey Dan, I'm a sub. Oh, bada bing. free koozie just for you. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. I know it wasn't all that exciting, but you know, wrenching on the garage was part of the honeydew list, so I figured I'd bring you along for a little bit of a sidebar project. And I hope to see you at AMA Vintage Days 2024. Dude, it's going to be a blast. So if you are going, get your gear ready now. Keep the shiny side up, and we'll see you later.